Last yesterday.
So we're going to begin today's Shiur. It is after last week's introduction to Sefer Shoftim, I thought I was going to just jump right into chapter 1 of the Sefer and just go forward. And my dear friend Rose says to me, "Are you giving a Shavuot shiur?" And I said, "Oh, actually, I hadn't thought about it for the class, but I will." And so that was like 4 days ago. and and so I decided to change my direction, and I hope that it will hope it will come out okay, or more than okay. So let's begin. And our topic for today is Hag HaShavuot, Megillat Ruth, and the Shoftim period. Look at that. We put them all together. All three things: Shavuot, Megillat Ruth, and Shoftim. And you probably are saying, well, that's probably a stretch. How did she do that? Well, it was actually quite easy. So let's begin. The reading of the book of Ruth on our beautiful Chag of Shavuot is a custom we've done as long as we can remember. It's a vivid and emotional saga of that tells many stories. It's not a simple one-layered story. It is a drama set in the backdrop of a significant period of history, which of the Israelites, which is the period of the Shoftim. And we know that for a fact. Interestingly enough, we are told that it is part of the period of Judges in the first pasuk. Let me put that on the screen.
Wow. Oh yeah, it says when the judges judged.
That's right. So here we go. Now,
I never thought of that.
That's right. Look at this. It says right here. Linda, go ahead and read the screen.
Oh. The reading of the book of Ruth is one of the beautiful...
just the highlight.
Just that sentence, yeah. And it came to pass in the days when the judges judged that there was a famine in the land. I can't, my voice is not...
Okay. Adele, jump right in.
Okay, now it came to pass in the days when the judges judged that there was a famine in the land, and a man went from Bethlehem to Judah to sojourn in the fields of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons.
Okay, so here we go. We are told in the first sentence that the story of Ruth is all taking place during the period of Shoftim. Did anybody know that?
No.
So now we've set the stage. We've set the stage for the period of time when Megillat Ruth actually takes place. And we also know that the Megillat Ruth was written by the same person who wrote Shoftim, Sefer Shoftim, Shmuel Hanavi. So Shmuel Hanavi is telling us in 2 different texts, 2 different stories. he's telling us they are basically the flip side of each other. Sefer Shoftim is a historical account of the trials and tribulations that Bnei Yisrael has to undergo in its fledgling and early years in Eretz Yisrael. It's about the turmoil within a nation not yet comfortable within its own skin and seeking a leader to bring the country together. And yet, what is happening throughout the period of Judges is that during the internal struggle of the Bnei Yisrael to identify who they are and what their mission, their godly mission is, they struggle with not only themselves, but they struggle with all the nations surrounding them. And at the time, they were completely surrounded with the Philistines on the Western Mediterranean side and all the other areas, north, south, east, and west of all the nations that we learned in Yehoshua. So with that in mind, a struggling nation, Bnei Yisrael, seeking other deities to help them fix their problems, straying from God. What does Megillat Ruth tell us? Well, Megillat Ruth is the story of how one family within a whole nation handles the situation, the national situation, and the behavior of each family member, and how they think that their behavior is right for themselves and their family. And when good people prevail, we understand how the message of Megillat Ruth is so surprisingly novel at this time and this place. So let's take a look. First of all, we have to, because we haven't really learned about Shoftim yet, I'm going to give you a few points of thought about what was actually going on during this 400-year period of time, from the time we entered Eretz Canaan until the end of the Shoftim period when Shmuel Hanavi anoints King Shaul. Now, the period was a very difficult one for the young Israelite nation. Throughout these years, they are repeatedly, over and over again, straying and having difficulties with their mission of being a Torah nation and a godly nation. But there are times in which a leader will arise from a particular tribe, wherever that the crisis of the nation happens. It seems that that is the tribe from which we have a judge who God appoints, and they rise to the occasion, most of the time in a military way, to come to the aid of Bnei Yisrael. And what happens? They come, they take charge, the enemy is destroyed, it is the country is brought back to their senses, and the leader or the judge fades away, and we assume that he dies. And oftentimes we hear that they die, but they fade into obscurity after their mission has been accomplished. Now, the second thing is what is the nature of this judge leader type person? And they are really They are really a person who is given a chance by God to prove themselves worthy of taking care of the absence of a cohesive nation, and through their leadership, creating some semblance of structure and return to worship of Hashem. So, having said that about the judges, the third point of the Shoftim period is that we have low spiritual self-esteem. The period is characterized by powerful attraction to other deities. We know that the two most popular deities of the time when Bnei Israel stray are the deity of Baal and the deity Ashtaroth. And we learned about Ashtaroth, the tree-like god that people put in their front yards, on their property, worshiping them. And of course, there was the most horrible of horribles, the deity of Molech, which was a child sacrificing deity. Now, the Tanakh says that it is this turning away from God of Israel, which angers God so much that it leads him to remind the people of Israel through subjecting them to the oppression of other nations, that they have left the worship and adherence to believing in one God. And what more can God do but say, you have sinned, these people are coming to conquer you, show me that you remember me. And so what happens is we have this throughout the 400-year period, which is a very difficult, struggling time for Bnei Israel. The fourth point is that there was intertribal friction between Bnei Israel. Each tribe was not helpful necessarily to the other, to their brethren. It does. We do not see that the tribes were a cohesive unit working and striving towards creating a united country. They are all over the map. They are struggling with their own personal issues as well as how to have a country that works as a godly nation. And so the friction between tribes creates friction between families, and friction between families is and difficulties is what we see as we learn about Sefer Ruth. Now, the problems of this era, as we can now see from these 4 points, is that there is they're enormously complex.
Rhonda,
Something happened.
excuse me, you're being cut out all the time. You're not being smooth. So we're hearing part of what you're saying. I don't know if I'm the only one.
No, you're not.
No,
And your sound is not I don't know if it's my sound or your sound.
All right, somebody raise their hand or something when you can't hear me. Maybe I'm turning my head. Okay. So can you hear me now?
Please repeat like the last.
It's smooth.
What you were
No,
saying.
it's smooth.
Okay. So the complex issues of this time were enormous, and they didn't have an easy time. It wasn't family helping family. It wasn't brethren helping brethren, community helping community, tribes helping tribes. It was a very, very difficult period of time. And so we see that the country was quite a bit in turmoil. Even though there were periods of rest, there were mostly periods of turmoil. I'm going to put on the screen, just a moment. Yeah, the perspective from Sefer Shoftim of what really was going on here. Okay. On the one hand, Sefer Shoftim blames the ills of the error on Avodah Zarah, idolatry, what was going on in the nation. And then as a result of this, Chazals tell us, and this is not new to us. Cynthia, can you read this for us? These are the 5 parts of each cycle of Bnei Yisrael. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Israel's sin, serving other gods, local deities like Baal and Ashtaroth. God delivers them to their enemies. They cry out, moan. Verse 18, to Hashem. He appoints a leader to save them and keep their allegiance to Hashem. Then the leader dies and they return to stage 1.
So you see this cycle repeats itself over and over and over again. And stage 1 is when the difficulties start to begin, when the Bnei Yisrael cry out. At stage 3, God sends them somebody, and at this point it's a judge / military leader, and it's not a judge like a courtroom judge or a person making judicial decisions. It is a leader, most likely to lead us in battle against those who are oppressing us. And then we go through the other 2 stages, which eventually takes us back to 1. Go ahead, Cynthia. Can you?
In other words, Hashem punishes the people for abandoning his service. The lack of national security is a direct outgrowth of the lack of religious commitment of the nation. But on the other hand, Sefer Shoftim is also aware of another cause. In those days, there was no king in Israel, as every man did as he pleased.
Okay, so this particular pasuk, as you see, is said how many times here? 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 times throughout the end of the text of Sefer Shoftim. Now, what does this imply? It's in those days, meaning in the days of the judges, there was no national leader, there was no political leader, there was no religious leader, and there was every person doing whatever he wanted. It seems like it was utter chaos. And what happens to a nation under these circumstances? They cannot survive. And so that's why this period was so difficult. So
I think you're making a terrible mistake, Bracha. This is not a nation. It wasn't. It was a group of tribes that descended from a particular family, but it's basically a group of tribes acting in their own best interest. The whole point here is, I think, that God promised that there would be a king who would unite everyone, and the king has not come yet.
Well,
and why Ruth is important.
Okay, well, that is partially true. However, in Devarim and in Yehoshua, both Moshe Rabbeinu and Yehoshua tell the Bnei Yisrael they are a nation, and
They will be.
they have to be a nation in order to survive. And there is, at that point in time, there is no mention of king. The Bnei
But-
Yisrael,
But again, the fact that they have to be told that they are a nation means they are not a nation. The whole issue of this transfer and the shocking statement at the very, very end of that everybody of Judges, that everybody did as everybody wanted to do, including killing out almost an entire Shevet, is the explanation of why why a king was needed. And in fact, it's interesting that the Shevet that they destroyed was Binyamin.
well, wait, we're not going there yet. This is not.
I know that,
Okay.
but my point is they're not a nation yet. They will be.
Okay. I mean, I don't. Okay, that's not the point exactly of where we're going at this point, but your point is noted and well taken. Thank you. Okay. So what was the problem here? There were two problems. There were the political causes and I do consider them a nation. When they were given the directive from Yehoshua and Moshe Rabbeinu to act like a nation, the land was divided according to each tribe, and they were to work with each other with Shiloh as its capital. They had a capital. They had a Kohen Gadol who was supposed to be in charge, and as a religious nation, and each one was supposed to help the other. And we learned a lot about how they did help each other in Yehoshua. Now, having said that, we now go and look now standing the times in which the Bnei Yisrael are living in at this point in their new land. We now look at the book of Ruth and how that plays into the times of the judges. So I should not have closed this. Okay, hold on, sorry. So here, it's the book of Ruth. Let's read the first two psukim of the book of Ruth. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Now it came to pass in the days when the judges judged that there was a famine in the land, and a man went from Bethlehem of Judah to sojourn in the fields of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi, and his 2 sons were named 2 sons' names were Machlon and Chilion. Ephratites from Bethlehem of Judah, and they came to the fields of Moab and remained there.
Okay, so the first 2 opening lines tell us a great deal of information. First of all, we learned that the judges judged. We learned the time period that this is happening. The second thing we learned is that there was a famine in the land. And the Mefarshim tell us that the famine was probably sent by Hashem as a punishment for their straying away from their observance of the Torah and mitzvah, and consequently not putting the priority of making this a godly nation. So here we find that there was a famine. There was no food in the land. And what we also learned here is that there was a man who came from Beit Lechem. What does Beit Lechem in Hebrew mean?
House of bread.
House of bread. Interesting that a person during a famine comes from the house of bread. And where is Bethlehem?
In Judah.
In Judah. Okay, so that gives us another piece of information, what tribe he's from. And then we learn that he sojourns to Moab, where he's going to escape the famine, and he and his wife and his 2 sons. So the first pasuk gives us tremendous information about this the opening pasuk about who the immediate characters are and what their situation is. We then learn that the man's name is Elimelech. Okay, his name, Elimelech, God is my king. And his wife, it gives us his wife's name is Naomi, meaning pleasant. And his 2 sons were named Machlon and Chilion. And at this point in time, we certainly don't think that Naomi and Elimelech named their sons Machlon, which can mean, one translation is sickness and Chilion is destruction. They did, at the time of their birth, they probably did not actually name them with those meanings in mind. There are other meanings, more pleasant meanings of the 2 names, but it gives us a bit of information about what we are to face in the coming days of this family. So they leave Beit Lechem from the tribe of Judah, and they go to the fields of Moab, and they stay there, meaning they stay there during the famine. Now, let's see, I think that, okay. Now, Megillat Ruth describes the same reality of the times, but from a very different vantage point. Chazal suggests that Elimelech left the country due to the hardships that were going on at the time of the country's judge's period of time, and specifically because he seemed to be a landowner and a wealthy man.
Right, he was rich.
As a result, what did we say? That people were not helping other people. People were not acting as a unified group, a family, community, or even on a national level. And it seemed as if it was every man for themselves. So Elimelech, who is a landowner and has certainly, we learn later chapters that he had some type of reputation, good reputation in his community of Beit Lechem, he decides to leave.
Tell me when it finishes and I'll come in and we'll talk.
Okay.
Who said it?
Michael, can you put it on mute, please?
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. So the Chazal not only suggest that Elimelech has abandoned his community, he's actually leaving his extended family, and that he must have enough money to survive this period, this famine period of time, in another country with his family. And so it gives us information about who Elimelech really was and what his status was. Megillat Ruth is really the civilian, the individual side of this conflict that's going on during Judges. And it's a time in which individuals are reluctant to lend a helping hand to anybody. So people are unwilling to assist others, and they fear for their own futures as a result of what's going on in the nation. Now, rather than taking a national point of view or a grand sweeping vision of things, Megillat Ruth is actually taking a very small view, a family view, a one family, single human story of what was going on at that time. And we see that how this all fits together. As we know, the leaving of Eretz Yisrael did the family absolutely no good, because we learn that both Elimelech and his two sons died. They died. And Naomi is left penniless and poor. And how we say, well, okay, then what happens? She's left to deal with what's going on with her now, two Moabite daughter-in-laws, and she has to make some decisions. She tells the daughters-in-law to go back to their families, and it is believed that they are from kingly families, princely families of Moab, and they certainly could go back to their families and live a very lovely life. Orpah is one daughter-in-law, and she says goodbye to her mother-in-law Naomi and her sister-in-law Ruth. And the Orpah has the meaning of back of the neck. So when someone turns around and leaves, what is the last thing you see but the back of their neck? And she has gone back to her family. Ruth, on the other hand, takes a very, very different approach. And this is what we're going to learn about. Okay. This again.
Something wrong.
What? Okay, so here, let's see. Cynthia, can you read for us?
Sure. But how is her problem solved? Through kindness and charity. Ruth's kindness to Naomi. Do not urge
So
me.
wait a minute, let me explain before you continue. Now, these are the points that I'm trying to make of how this story of this family, now the family consists of Ruth, a daughter-in-law from Moab, and a mother-in-law who have lost husband, sons, and husband. So the points that I'm going to try and make here are how this story is so very different from what actually was going on in society at that time. So here, the first point, that Ruth is kind to her mother-in-law, Naomi. Okay? Now, what's the first thing that Ruth says to her mother-in-law? Go ahead, Cynthia.
Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried.
Okay, now that's in chapter 1. We learn her total commitment, totally on the side of Naomi, and she is not going to leave her mother-in-law, no matter how much Naomi pushes her away. She is committed to stay with her mother-in-law. Now, the next time we hear such devotion is in let's see, in the next pasuk, this next pasuk in chapter 2, pasuk 2. Go ahead.
And Ruth the Moabitess says to Naomi, I will go now to the field, and I will glean among the ears of grain after someone whom I will please. And she said, Go, my daughter.
Okay, so in this particular pasuk, we are now back with Naomi and Ruth have returned to Bethlehem. They have returned to their homeland. We are assuming that the famine is over because she is going to the fields, and she is going to glean grain from those fields. So the famine is over. People hopefully have returned to some semblance of decency. And so Ruth is telling Naomi that she is going to go get food for them in the fields. And Ruth is directed to which fields to go to of Naomi's family, extended family, which we learn is Boaz. Okay, so now in returning to Bethlehem, we find that not only is there kindness and charity from Ruth to Naomi, we find that Boaz has great consideration of Ruth. So in chapter 2, we find the following. Go ahead, Cynthia.
And her mother-in-law said to her, Where have you gleaned today, and where have you worked? May he who took heed of you be blessed. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and she said, The name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord, who did not leave off his kindness with the living or with the deceased. And Naomi said to her, The man is our kinsman. He is one of our near kinsmen. And Ruth the Moabitess said, He also said to me, You shall stay with my youths until they finish my entire harvest.
Okay, so here is a conversation of Naomi and Ruth. Naomi wants to know where she went to get the grain. She tells her that it's in the field of Boaz, and she says that's our kinsman. It's on the side of Elimelech, and consequently, Naomi is very delighted to know that she went to those fields, and that Boaz singled her out and said that she could stay there, and he indicates that there are, as we know, the corners of the fields that are left for poor people to glean, and so there are lots of people, particularly after a famine, coming to the fields, picking the wheat, taking it home for free. And Boaz has opened his fields to the community as the Torah prescribes. Now, what happens is that Ruth apparently, as we know through much of description in the chapter 2, is a modest person. She goes humbly there. She hopes that she will be noticed, and that she is not running after all the other youths in the field that are, gleaning the field with her, the boys, the men, etc. She is doing her job as a daughter-in-law to provide food for her table and Naomi's. So then we find that Boaz, he observes Ruth's modesty and behavior. And what does he say to her? Go ahead.
And he said, "May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. Your latest act of kindness is greater than the first, not to follow the young men, whether poor or rich." Boaz's opinion of Ruth. And now, my daughter.
So he says to her, I noticed you. I know that I see that you don't go hanging out at the bars with the young guys after work, after you've picked at the fields. I see that you go home, you don't hang out. And so, it's a very apparent thing that she is
We don't need money,
modest
right?
in all
We
her
don't need
ways.
cash.
Okay. Now let's go to Boaz's opinion of Ruth. Now that in chapter 3, he's had time to observe her. He's had time to see who she is and what she does in the fields, because she returns often. And this is what he says.
And now, my daughter, do not fear. All that you say I will do for you. For the entire gate of my people know that you are a valiant woman. Eshet Chayil. You want me to read the Hebrew?
Yes, please.
You are tar biti el tirai kol asher tomari. אעשה לך כי יודע כל שאר עמי כי אשת חיל את.
Okay, now the reason I put the Hebrew here, I didn't put it anywhere else, is because Boaz calls Ruth and Eshet Chayil. This is the first time in Tanakh that we ever hear this phrase used, referring to a woman. We hear about valiant people, we hear about courageous women or extraordinary women, but this is the first time the Hebrew Eshet Chayil is used. Now, the second time that the word Eshet Chayil is used in all of Tanakh, does anyone know? The second time Eshet Chayil is used is in Mishlei, in Proverbs, that Shlomo HaMelech writes. Mishlei 31 is the woman of valor. His proverb, Eshet Chayil, woman of valor. Shlomo HaMelech is the great-great-grandson of Ruth. And so I attribute that Mishlei to the fact that Shlomo HaMelech is writing about his great-great-grandmother. And I think that should we learn that as a separate entity, we can see how there is many reasons to believe that. Now, having said that, we continue that Boaz has a commitment to Elimelech, his relative, because we know that in those days there was what was called levirate marriages, that should a man die with a child and leave his wife childless, that it is the responsibility of the next of kin, the next male, to marry the wife and to have a child in the name of the deceased. Now, when Naomi and Ruth come back to Beit Lechem, Naomi knows that there are relatives left behind in Beit Lechem, and she is hoping that Ruth will, in fact, attract one of the closest one, and he will marry her and give her a grandchild through her lineage, through her son's lineage, and in his name. And what we find is that the first person, the closest one, does not want to have anything to do with this Levirate marriage, and he in public denounces it. The next in line is Boaz. And so consequently, we are now, and we can read in the text when we're reading it, the entire preparation of how Naomi is so meticulous in how she prepares Ruth to go to the fields, what to say, what to do, etc. And Boaz now is we have his commitment to Elimelech, because he says publicly that he will honor the Levirate marriage. So go ahead.
And Boaz said to the elders and to the entire people, "You are witnesses today that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Machlon's from Naomi."
Okay, so
And
hold it. Wait, hold it there. So here we're told that Boaz goes to the elders and he says to all the people in that community, he says, "You are my witness that I have done what is supposed to be done by the next of kin in order to marry and to make a new family for my deceased family." And he mentions Elimelech is the father, and Chilion and Machlon the sons of from Naomi. And he has bought the property, and now he has added that to his already extensive property. And he then says, go ahead.
"And also Ruth the Moabitess, Machlon's wife, have I acquired for myself for a wife, to preserve the name of the deceased on his heritage, so that the name of the deceased not be obliterated from his brethren, and from the gate of his place. You are witnesses today."
Okay, so this is both Boaz's commitment to Elimelech and Ruth by, being part of this. I mean, she has little to say basically about it. She feels that she has a commitment to her deceased husband's memory by marrying and hopefully having a child, and that the child will be his lineage. So Elimelech, God is my king, can also indicate that there will be a king, a godly king from me, alive from me. So we find in the next pasuk, go ahead.
"And the woman said to Naomi, Blessed is the Lord, who did not deprive you of a redeemer today, and may his name be famous in Israel."
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about this. This is when Ruth has a child. She has been intimate with Boaz. We know that's part of the story. And now she's had a child, and all the women of the neighborhood gather around Naomi, and they say to her, "Blessed is the Lord who did not deprive you of a redeemer." And it's not necessarily, it's a redeemer, of someone who's going to come forth and be a great person, although we do know here from the genetic line it is. However, it's a redeemer for her situation. She has no children left, and consequently no grandchildren. And Ruth and the union of Ruth and Boaz has changed that situation for Naomi, and they has redeemed her situation and given her someone to carry on the family lineage. We know that the son that Ruth and Boaz has is Oved. Oved has Yeshayahu, Jesse, and Jesse is the father of David, and David is the father of Shlomo. So the Davidic line comes directly from Ruth and Boaz. Okay, so go ahead.
The way in which one reaches redemption in the story of Ruth is through chesed, giving up to life's responsibilities, caring for those around us, thinking beyond ourselves.
Okay, so if we take all of these examples for the story of Ruth, we find out that there is reward in this, and there is a change of behavior. So it's, let's see here. So we learn that it's quite remarkable that Shmuel, who writes these two books about this period of time, in his first book of Shoftim, suggests that that the nation will be saved only through religious transformation and through an organized central government. And in this regard, Shmuel acts as a true statesman and says exactly what the country needs to guide them through the course of becoming of all these national events and becoming a united nation. Interestingly enough, in his second book, Shmuel suggests that it is not just the national level that's going to change everything, but each one of us, through small but heroic acts of kindness, one can change the world. And I think that today is such an important lesson for us to learn, that one may bring about redemption, one may bring about all kinds of change from our family unit to our community unit to our city, state, and country and worldwide units through acts of chesed, acts of kindness, acts of respect, acts of love, and that it is not just petty words that or small talk when we say all you need is love. And it can even bring about redemption in the way of that Ruth brings through the lineage of her family to the birth of King David himself, who is the unifier of the nation. And just through these particular acts of kindness and responsibility, public policy in all areas can be changed and disaster can be averted. And we find that in the end, and I'm going to put here, in the end, that what is the greatest thing that we can do as a nation to preserve ourselves as a Torah abiding nation, a light into the nation? Well, I'll tell you. As you all know, I am very, very much into finding the Pesukim throughout the Torah that gives us the information that we need and to carry on and to do things, that nothing is in a vacuum in all of Tanakh. So here, right here, is the pasuk from Vayikra, way back in the Chumash, the third book of the Torah, Vayikra, Leviticus. This is the pasuk that says it all in terms of Shavuot, the story of Ruth, and the situation of the people in the story of Ruth during Shoftim. You want to read it?
Ruth is not a story of revelation of Torah at Sinai, like part of the Chag celebrates, but it is a story of the essence of the Torah and its mitzvot. It is a very human story with deep human emotions, like fear, insecurities, kindness, consideration, and responsibility. And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the
Go
poor.
away. Get out of here.
Go ahead.
You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. Vayikra.
So here we're told exactly, this is where we understand what the importance of the story of Ruth is from the Torah, that it's about the harvest, the sharing, the consideration of others, the working together, the hopefulness of people who have and don't have. And it's all the chesed that Hashem is saying that we need to adhere to be a godly nation, because Hashem is the Lord our God. And we learn that early on, and it isn't until we get to Sefer Megillat Ruth that we totally understand this, and that it becomes apparent what this particular pasuk means. So in the end, in the times when the judges judged and the famine was sent because the judges and the people were not up to snuff of what God wanted for his godly nation, we learn that small acts of kindness, responsibility, love, and affection for one another, and the help of one another, and the goodness of one another can make tremendous strides and go a tremendous distance in changing what is not good to very good. And who knows that from any one person will come, from their acts of kindness and love, the redemption and even the possible Mashiach ben David. Thank you. Shavuot, Chag Sameach. Have a beautiful Shavuot.
Beautiful, thank you.
Thank
As
you.
always.
Very,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wanda.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Lovely and very.
Wanda, thank you.
Rhonda, I have a
Rhonda.
question.
Yes, if let's
The two wives, they were Moabites.